Hi, my name is Paul Musembwa. I'm the CEO of Warp Developments. In my previous video, I talked about a housing bug. I know that sounds like a strange notion, but I was bitten by a housing bug 16 years ago. It's been a 16-year journey where I had to ask myself the question as an African. I went to business school in Berkeley. I wanted to make money. I wanted a successful career. Interestingly, my scholarship, which was a USAID scholarship, required that I go back to Uganda. So I remember being recruited by Bain and Company. I tried McKinsey, that didn't work. It was interesting, but all the companies that were interviewing me wanted me to stay in the United States. I couldn't stay in the United States, I had to go back to Uganda. And so going back to Uganda after my MBA, I worked at a couple of banks. It wasn't fulfilling. I then ended up working at this company in a rural part of Uganda that was really struggling. The company was dying, the area was very poor, and that's when I started asking myself the question about how do you grow an economy from scratch? By 2000, I was bitten by this housing bug. I realized that the one thing that you could do that could start with absolutely nothing, but just the demand that people represent, was housing. If we could build the housing that Ugandans needed, we could actually grow the economy. It was an exciting idea. And I started to put together the pieces, talking to people. I remember speaking to an uncle that has a relationship. He's a personal friend of the king of Buganda. I asked him, is there any way I can do something with this? And I said, yeah, I can introduce you to the king sometime. I didn't feel ready at the time. I was still thinking through these ideas. Ended up in the US again. Went as a development consultant, international development consultant, the people that work for the Ford Foundation, the World Bank. Did that work for a year and a half. It was not fulfilling. I quit. At that point, I decided I have to do something about this housing thing. I teamed up with a friend, and we started down this path of thinking about the economy in new ways. We looked at what was happening in the housing market in the United States. If anyone remembers 2002 in the US, you had all this excitement, ninja loans and all these crazy stuff going on. And we could see the US was headed for trouble. We were making predictions that came true 5, 7, 10 years later. But we were absolutely convinced that the destinies of the global north, developed countries, US, Canada, Europe, you name it, were inextricably linked to those of the global south, especially Africa. We had to find a way to get this money into Africa to do the stuff Africa needed. Housing, urbanization. So early in this journey, in 2003, I was fortunate to set up a joint venture with the King of Buganda. I then had to find money to build housing on 200 acres of land that had been promised. I got the pension fund in Uganda to agree to put equity into a joint venture company. But then, unfortunately, that fell apart because the land could not be secured. There wasn't any land without squatters on it, so eventually the deal fell apart. But to get the pension fund to agree to invest in our joint venture, I had to make a presentation to the president of Uganda. That was exciting. I met him at his hotel room in DC, Saturday morning, breakfast meeting, and I talked about housing as the engine of the economy. He disagreed with me. He quoted the standard economic growth approach, which is agrarian societies become industrialized, etc. Then you can talk about housing. But we had this wonderful interaction, wonderful debate, and he said, I like your thinking, young man. What do you need? I said, we need you to allow the pension fund to invest in large-scale housing. And he said, go for it. And when that happened, I realized that I was capable of making the case for affordable housing production as a tool for economic development. It was a seminal moment in my life. Brings me to where we are right now, of developments. We're not going to do the same thing, but this is 14 years later. Older, wiser, stronger partnerships. We're going to make this happen.